Chronicles of the Wolf, a brand new Metroidvania. I can promise you that this game contains most of what you can expect. Lots of exploration, lots of enemies and bosses, but above all, that feeling that you get stronger the further you go. Chronicles of the Wolf is released for Nintendo Switch on June 19th, and in this video we check out how the game is experienced on both Switch 1 and 2. Feel free to subscribe to my channel and give the video a thumbs up. Let's go! This is a game that takes you back to 18th century France. A gigantic creature called the Beast of Gévaudan is rampaging freely and killing everything in its path. Corpses everywhere, missing people and so on. Something must be done, and this is where our hero comes into play. You play as Matteo Lombardo, a man whose destiny is to put an end to the violence and deal with it once and for all. But it won't be an easy journey. Many people are corrupt, and when you least expect it, our hero ends up in tricky situations. There is something more going on here than just a threat from a gigantic beast, something that lurks in the shadows. The question is what? Something that you as the player will have to find out for yourself. But I can say that it is a game that doesn't really focus much on the dialogues. They are usually short, but to the point. You shouldn't expect a lengthy narrative, most of it is said in a couple of sentences, and it works great. It helps to ensure that there is a constant flow in the game, you're constantly on the move. The game's inhabitants often provide important information, and surprisingly little is nonsense. So I realized pretty quickly that it might be wise to memorize what people say. It can make things a lot easier. You get clues that can lead you in the right direction. And as a whole, I think the game's narrative, in all its simplicity, makes an important role in making me feel invested in what's going on. If we take a look at the overall design of the game, we recognize a lot from before. We get classic elements repackaged in a new game. And in my opinion, as someone who loves Metroidvanias, I never get tired of this type of adventure, even though I've seen a lot before. The two-dimensional exploration is one such thing. On the maps, it's about going where you haven't been and trying to find small holes that might be worth exploring. It's often the little things that can make a big difference. You can potentially run around for hours without finding your way, only to discover that you missed a small detail that basically opens up a new world. And that's the case in this game too. It can be an advantage to study the map carefully, literally exploring every millimeter. Sometimes you find hidden paths that can be crucial for progression, or you find an object that takes you further, or new places open up by talking to a specific individual. There are many different paths forward, and sometimes you have to test different possibilities to get ahead. The maps are clear about where you haven't been, but they don't really reveal much. You can see possible portals and places where you can save, but they don't give too much away. They don't tell you where all the villages are, or items you haven't picked up yet, or where you can expect to fight a boss. The map mostly functions as a navigator without revealing too much, so while the map is helpful, it's still up to the player to explore each area and maybe even be surprised by what awaits around the corner. The world is inspired by 18th century France and is very atmospheric. At the beginning of the game, you run around in forest areas, where you sometimes come across corpses hanging from a tree. You discover a large water wheel that has broken down, and sometimes you make your way to a new village where you can interact with people. And everything is wrapped up in a day-to-night cycle. If you run around the world at night, you can discover things that weren't there during the day, and vice versa. And it's pretty cool that you can visually see what an area looks like in the morning, in broad daylight, when it's dusk and at night. It makes the whole game feel more alive, but you can also expect gigantic castles and other surroundings that contribute to visual depth. It almost gives a slightly eerie feeling to run around in gloomy and worn castle ruins. You really get the feeling that it was a long time ago that there was a civilization here, and now everything has been taken over by the forces of evil. When it comes to the game's enemies, we're mostly talking about fantasy creatures. You can expect to fight a variety of different types of monsters. each with their own specialties. And each area generally has its own set of enemies, which adds to the atmosphere of the game. In the forests you can expect tree monsters, skeletons and birds. In the water you will find giant fish and blobs, a classic monster that I remember from Castlevania 2. But my favorite enemy is probably this one, a humanoid creature made of vines. Pretty easy to kill, but a cool idea in a game. Then we have all the bosses, and there are a lot of them. Each boss is unique, with abilities and attacks to avoid. But I want to point out that the difficulty level is relatively low. I managed to kill about 15 bosses before I finally met a boss that was reasonably difficult. I managed to one-shot most of them, with a few exceptions. But I definitely felt that it got harder the further into the game I got. On some bosses I had to learn a certain pattern and be patient, and sometimes it was just like that. Study what the boss does and wait until the right moment, then you deal out as much damage as you can. But far from all bosses were like that, but most of them I could take down with ease, just stand and hit until the boss's energy runs out. So my overall impression is that the bosses are generally pretty easy to take down, but they get harder later in the game. When it comes to the control, I think it gives a mixed impression. It is certainly responsive and many abilities are easy to use. It feels easy to walk, jump between platforms and climb ropes, which are the most common ways to move forward. But at the same time most weapons feel a bit clumsy, and there are a few different types. The reason I don't really like it is that you automatically become static when you attack, so you cannot move when you use a weapon. This forced me to attack in a different way, for example swinging my axe while jumping. This gave a certain mobility compared to standing still on the ground and hitting. Above all, it felt clumsy against specific enemies, where it was basically very difficult to attack without taking damage myself. So most of the weapons, regardless of whether I used melee or ranged, almost none of them were comfortable to use, which was due to the static feeling. I would have liked to have been able to walk and swing at the same time, but I don't think that option is available in the game. So if I want to use a dagger, I have to stand still. A saber, stand still. A sword, stand still. A two-handed sword, stand still. And a rifle, stand still and wait for it to reload. I have played the game on both Switch 1 and 2. And when it comes to performance, there is a clear difference. The game is probably primarily optimized for the old console, as I experienced that it ran much better. On Switch 2 there were noticeable problems, for example flashing menus and occasional problems with the frame rate in certain areas, something that I rarely noticed on Switch 1, but the developers have announced that there will soon be a patch for Switch 2 that will make the experience more stable, so it's probably only a matter of time before the game will run well on both consoles. I would also like to add that I have not experienced any crashes. There are also tons of items to find in the game, and these are items that in one way or another either develop the character or open up a new path. I don't want to spoil too much about this, but it's worth noting that if you play on, you will notice that the items make the hero change a lot. And this is definitely one of the most fun things in the game, in my opinion, that you find something that gives you a new power, whether it's a weapon, an armor or something else. Some things are typical Metroidvania skills, as you often see in this type of game. But there are still some items or abilities that are a little different, and that make this Metroidvania a little different. So, then comes the question of whether this game is worth buying. If you're a big fan of Metroidvania games and appreciate the genre, then I hardly think you will be disappointed. There is a lot to do in this game, lots to explore, lots of monsters to take on, and a story that mixes both myth and reality. In addition, I really like the environment, which feels well crafted. A few villages to visit, large castles, and dark caves. It's fun. And for $20, I definitely think it's worth the money. There are a couple of things that I disliked though. Although the control feels responsive, the weapons in particular feel a bit clumsy to use. And if you don't get used to using them, you can get into trouble. And there are also some performance issues on the Switch too, but as I said, the developers have promised to fix this as quickly as possible, maybe even by the game's release on June 19th. That said, an entertaining and fun Metroidvania. Feel free to subscribe to my channel and give the video a thumbs up. Have a great day. See ya!